Kevin Morales hit her so hard, she spun off her feet. He didn't bite. He tackled. Full sprint across the sidewalk, teeth bared, blood already coating his chin from someone else. Sarah Whitaker crashed into the hood of a parked sedan and slid down the metal, breath knocked out of her. Her son Ethan screamed once, that sharp, high sound that travels too far. Kevin was already back on his feet. They don't hesitate. They don't stalk. They commit. He lunged again, fast enough that most people would freeze. I didn't. Distance, 15 feet. Closing speed, high. No time for warning shots. I stepped into him, left shoulder forward, rifle angled tight to my body. First round to center mass. It didn't slow him. Second round higher, sternum fracture. He stumbled but kept coming. They don't feel pain. They don't reconsider. They accelerate. At 6 feet, I pivoted, let him overcommit. His fingers grazed Sarah's jacket but didn't find skin. That was the margin. That was the line between life and infection. I drove the muzzle under his chin as he twisted, fired upward. The back of his skull ruptured against the brick storefront behind him. He collapsed mid-stride and skidded across the pavement. No twitch, no recovery. Done. Up, I told her. She couldn't process it. Ethan ran to her instead. That kid didn't freeze. He pulled at her sleeve. Mom, Mom. Good kid. 3 more came out of the pharmacy doors at full sprint. Not stagger, not drift. Full sprint. Eyes locked, mouths open, arms pumping like athletes. You do not outrun them in open space. You break their structure. I stepped forward instead of back. Controlled burst. 2 rounds into the lead runner's upper thoracic cavity. It didn't slow. They don't stop for pain. They stop for structural failure. I shifted to cranial, 1 through the orbital ridge. The head snapped back and the body collapsed mid-stride, flipping onto asphalt. The second infected used the fallen body as leverage and launched over it. Fast. Too fast for most civilians. Not for me. I transitioned to sidearm. Rifle sling drop. 1 step lateral. It overshot. Momentum carries them. That's the weakness. I caught it mid-turn and put 2 rounds through the temple at 3 feet. It dropped hard enough to crack pavement with its teeth. The third was almost on Ethan. Sarah finally moved. She grabbed him and rolled sideways. Good instinct. I closed distance and fired from retention. Point blank. Forehead. Immediate drop. Silence lasted half a second. Then more screaming from down the block. And answering sprints. Magazine check. 7 rounds remaining. Too exposed. Too many sight lines. Move, I said. Sarah stood this time. No arguing, no questions. Adrenaline overrides shock when death moves that fast. We ran through the hardware store instead of down the open street. Glass shattered behind us as 2 more crashed into the entrance where we'd been standing seconds earlier. They didn't slow down for obstacles. They plowed through them. That's how people die. They assume the infected will hesitate. They don't. Inside the store, I cleared corners fast. Short bursts. Headshots only when necessary. No time for double taps to the chest. Head or break contact. We broke contact. Out the service door, into the alley. Truck 50 yards away. Too far. Too open. One of them vaulted the chain link fence to our left. Cleared it clean. landed wrong, recovered instantly. I didn't aim, I snapped. One round through the nasal cavity. Drop. Another came around the dumpster behind us. Too close. I stepped in, drove my forearm across its throat to redirect the bite trajectory, and fired through the side of its skull at contact distance. It went limp against me. Dead weight. Heavy. Sarah and Ethan reached the truck. I covered until they were inside. Then I moved. No victory, no pause. Because fast infected don't trail. They converge. I got behind the wheel and turned the engine over. As we pulled out, I saw at least 8 more breaking into a sprint down the street. Not random, not scattered. Directed. Toward noise, toward movement, toward us. Sarah finally found her voice. "Where are we going?" I didn't look at her. To the house. And if I'd been 10 seconds later, she would have been dead. Because bites mean death. And fast means you don't get a second chance. 3 years before Kevin Morales sprinted across asphalt with blood in his mouth, I was already inside the basement. Not legally, just physically. The mansion sat 2 miles outside Alexandria city limits, far enough to avoid dense spillover, close enough to reach supply lines before panic hit. Tree line thick on 3 sides, long gravel drive. From the road it looked abandoned. From above it looked irrelevant. That made it perfect. No one checked on the property. Taxes handled through a trust. Utilities disconnected years ago. No maintenance inspections. No neighbors close enough to care. I confirmed that before I ever moved anything inside. You don't prepare in places people watch. You prepare where neglect protects you. I started underground, because underground doesn't show. The basement was reinforced concrete, poured thicker than code required in the early 90s. Old wine storage area behind shelving. Mechanical hinges embedded in brickwork. Someone had once imagined protection. They just didn't finish it. I did. First shipments came in at night, 2 or 3 loads at a time. Unmarked cargo trailer, headlights off once I cleared the main road. Trees masked the approach well enough that unloading couldn't be seen unless someone drove halfway up the gravel. And no one did. Water tanks first. Underground storage, gravity-fed system, manual pump backup, filtration redundancy. If municipal supply failed, we wouldn't notice. Then came dry storage, not flashy prepper nonsense. Caloric density, rotation schedule, vacuum-sealed reserves. 2 years supply for 3 adults, more if rationed. I built inward, not outward. Steel reinforcement added to interior load-bearing columns. Ballistic laminate panels inserted behind original basement walls. Airflow rerouted through baffled ductwork disguised as old vent shafts. No external change. From the outside, the house continued to rot. Peeling paint, sagging shutters, mildew creeping along brick seams. Good. Decay is camouflage. The upper floors were the problem. You can't fortify a roof without someone noticing. Reinforce windows too obviously, and a passing driver sees it. Replace beams, and the lumber deliveries give you away. So I waited. Mapped. Planned. Calculated load tolerances without making noise. The bunker could function without the upper fortifications. But long-term survival required vertical advantage. And that part had to be legal. Henry Calloway never visited the mansion. He lived in a small house closer to town, 83 years old, sharp mind, zero interest. He thought the mansion was a mistake his brother made, a money pit, a monument to ego. I thought it was geometry waiting to be used. I knocked on his door 3 times over 6 months. Each time, same answer. No. He didn't ask what I was building, didn't ask why I wanted it. He didn't care. That made him harder to move than someone greedy. Greed is leverage. Apathy is not. By the time the basement system was fully functional, I had water independence, food independence, ventilation independence, emergency lighting on battery banks, and a hidden mechanical room that didn't exist on county blueprints. No one knew, because no one looked. Because abandoned properties don't attract curiosity. They repel it. Alexandria wasn't a major city, but it was large enough to be vulnerable. Regional hospital, distribution hubs, highway artery running north-south. If something spread through Baton Rouge or Houston and traveled inland, it would pass through here. Cities this size don't collapse gracefully. They don't have redundancy. They don't have hardened infrastructure. They have optimism. Optimism doesn't stop infection. I told Henry that once. He laughed. You think zombies are coming? No, I said. I think systems fail. He leaned back in his chair. You're preparing for something you might never see. I prepare so I don't have to guess. He studied me for a long time, then shook his head. You won't get the house. That was fine, for now, because he didn't know what was already underneath it. And I couldn't touch the top floors until I had paper, until I could reinforce beams and fortify angles without raising suspicion, until I could finish it properly. The basement was ready. The house was not. And the world had not yet begun to break.
Calories keep you alive. Nutrition keeps you functional. There's a difference. And in collapse scenarios, the second one decides whether you stay human. I didn't just study shelf life. I studied physiology. What happens to the body when stress extends beyond weeks? When cortisol never drops, when sleep fragments, when movement increases and food becomes uncertain. Protein deficiency leads to muscle loss. Muscle loss leads to weakness. Weakness leads to mistakes. Iron deficiency reduces oxygen transport. Low sodium disrupts nerve signaling. Magnesium loss increases cramping and cognitive drift. Vitamin C depletion weakens connective tissue. Vitamin D deficiency degrades immune response. You don't die immediately from these things. You deteriorate. Deterioration gets you killed. I pulled after-action medical reports from deployments, read studies on long-term caloric restriction, reviewed military ration design protocols, why MREs are built the way they are, why they include electrolyte powder, why sodium levels are high, why fat content isn't as low as civilians think it should be. In sustained stress environments, fat becomes critical. Hormonal stability, brain function, energy density. That's why I stocked peanut butter. That's why I vacuum-sealed nuts. That's why I rotated oil stores carefully. Oils go rancid first. You don't ignore that. White rice instead of brown wasn't laziness. It was oxidation rate. Beans weren't just protein. They were fiber regulation under stress. Freeze-dried vegetables weren't garnish. They were micronutrient insurance. Honey wasn't sugar. It was antibacterial, and it doesn't spoil. I built the food reserve assuming 3 phases. Phase 1, panic, higher calorie burn, adrenaline.
Phase 2, adjustment, lower output, ration discipline. Phase 3, stabilization, structured routines, agriculture or scavenging supplement. Every phase required different macro allocation, so I stored accordingly. Water intake was calculated alongside sodium reserves. Dehydration reduces decision-making speed. Cognitive lag is fatal in combat. So electrolyte packets weren't optional, they were mandatory. I even accounted for morale chemistry. Glucose spikes under stress reduce perceived threat temporarily. So I stocked controlled sweets. Not for comfort, for stabilization. Small amounts, scheduled. You can survive on junk for weeks. You cannot fight on junk for months. I wasn't building a pantry. I was building sustained operational capability. Each shelf wasn't labeled food. It was labeled by function. Protein, base calories, micronutrients, electrolytes, supplemental fats, redundancy. If I lost one category, I could compensate. If I lost two, I recalculated. You don't prep blindly. You model. Most people think survival is about guns. It's about digestion. Because if your gut fails, everything else does too. And if you're feeding others, you better understand what their bodies need before they do.
The armory wasn't the only thing that didn't belong in that basement. The computers didn't either. They were mounted along the far wall opposite the sealed power core. Flat screens, true flat, edge-to-edge glass with no visible housing bulk. Not early LCD thickness, not retrofitted panels. Thin enough to feel wrong in a room poured in the early 90s. Each one mounted on articulated arms that moved silently, balanced perfectly. No creak, no friction. In the lower corner of each bezel, barely visible unless the light hit it, small recessed lettering. DARPA. The processing core wasn't a tower. It wasn't even recognizable as a consumer machine. Sealed chassis embedded into the rack wall. No intake fans. No exhaust vent. No audible spin of drives. No vibration against the concrete. The moment I touched the input surface, the screens activated. Instant. No boot sequence. No delay. The interface didn't resemble anything I'd seen in civilian systems. Not Windows, not Linux, not military OS. It was modular, layered, minimalist. Every action I took populated secondary panels automatically, as if the system anticipated correlation, not search, correlation. The speed wasn't impressive, it was unnatural. Satellite feeds rendered in real time. Orbital imagery zoomed from global view to individual roadways without pixel distortion. No buffering, no latency. Military band overlays populated before public feeds caught up. Commercial constellations synchronized automatically. Starlink nodes appeared in the routing tree without manual configuration. The system authenticated itself across networks I didn't input credentials for. It didn't break in. It belonged. I navigated through defense, operational posture dashboards, force alignment maps, strategic modeling trees, regional stabilization, unnamed country scenario. Inside were draft plans, force movement projections, naval positioning simulations, logistics staging estimates. Nothing stamped classified, nothing marked active, but recent. Recent enough to still be in revision. The timestamps updated in near real time. I shifted to infrastructure, grid vulnerability overlays, hospital capacity mapping, fuel reserve projections, shipping lane disruptions, the kind of data that moves before headlines do. Then medical research expanded, the DEAD project,
The folder opened immediately. Cadaver experimentation logs, neural stimulus charts, electrical reactivation attempts, repeated terminology, reactivation threshold, post-mortem viability window, autonomic response consistency. Entries described mild success, repeatable but unstable. No declaration of full reanimation, just measurable response. The system began linking without instruction. Live epidemiological feeds, mortality spikes, urban unrest, then cross-referencing those against the Dead Project documentation, as if comparing theory to live data. The processing never slowed. Rendering load didn't change the hum in the room. The strange power source behind the racks remained steady. No heat increase, no surge. Water pressure still constant. Hot water cycling. Cold storage holding temperature. Climate control balanced. Air filtration stable. The armory secured. Every survival system operational. All of it contained inside the bunker. Not improvised, not pieced together. Installed. Integrated. Even the software carried the same faint imprint. In small print within the framework windows, DARPA, embedded into the architecture, not as branding, as authorship. The room felt less like a shelter, more like a node, buried beneath a decaying mansion just outside Alexandria, running decades ahead of anything civilians had access to in 2026. Manufactured in the early 90s, operating like something built in the 2060s, and live. Fully live.
Henry knew about the bunker. He'd known about it longer than I had. He just didn't know what I'd started putting inside it. I drove into Alexandria just before sunset, the tree line swallowing the road behind me as I left the mansion. I'd finished sealing another batch of dry goods that afternoon. Rice stacked, beans logged, protein counted. Cold storage units still empty, for now. Everything else in that bunker operational. Water, power, air, arms. Infrastructure older than it should be. Henry knew about all of that. He just didn't know I'd turned it into something personal. He opened the door without greeting. "You've been down there again." "Yes." "You're not supposed to modify anything." "I'm not modifying. I'm maintaining." He studied me. "You've always been too calm about it." "About what?" "That room." The television was on behind him, muted. Footage of international unrest cycling across the screen. He didn't look worried. He looked tired. "You understand what that bunker is," he said. "Yes." "It wasn't built for comfort." "No." "It wasn't built for hobbyists." "I'm not a hobbyist." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "I know." I sat down across from him. "You're reinforcing it," he said, "structurally." "And?" "And what?" "You're preparing it." I didn't answer that, because that was the line. He knew the bunker existed. He knew it was engineered for survival. He didn't know it was stocked. "You think something is coming," he said. "I think something always comes." That bunker wasn't built because someone thought the world was ending. It was built because someone thought something might. Henry shook his head. It was built because people with too much power get paranoid. Paranoia builds strong foundations. And it destroys everything else. The ticker at the bottom of the television updated. Another overseas cluster expanding. Supply chain disruptions spreading.
He muted it again. "You see confirmation," he said. "I see indicators. You see doom. I see risk." He leaned forward. "That bunker was never meant to be lived in. It has showers. It has systems. It has containment. It was a contingency site," he said sharply, "not a homestead. And what's the difference? Intent." He sat back again. "You don't get the house," he said. "I don't need the house to use the bunker. You need the house to justify it. I need the house to reinforce it. And I'm not giving it to you." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that isn't hostile, just unresolved. "You're turning it into something else," he said finally. "I'm making it viable." "For what?" "For when people start running." He shook his head. "You're wrong. And if I'm not, you are." He stood, conversation over. "You don't get the house," he repeated. "And you don't get to turn that bunker into a shrine to your fears." "It's not fear." "It is." He opened the door. I stepped outside. The air felt heavier than it had that morning. He didn't say goodbye. He just watched me walk to my truck. No revelation, no agreement, no supernatural hint. Just two men. One who believes preparation is insurance, one who believes it's surrender.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And come back for episode 2, because that's when everything starts to change. I'll see you there.